recorded live.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation or around the world. Once again, you're listening to the VMware Communities Roundtable Podcast. This is podcast number 593. My name is Eric Nelson, and with me today, I have my regular co-host, Matt Lungeth. Today's Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. Matt, how are you doing today?
Eric, I am well. I feel like today's episode is a little bit of pulling back the stage curtain with all things telco. It's an element of one of our BUs that we don't often talk about, but I think a lot of innovation and most certainly uptime and reliability, right? We talk about 5 nines and that mysterious,
Right.
uptime and reliability record that everyone wants to shoot for, but few achieve. Well, telcos are driven around that. And it's an interesting element of our business practice. And like I said, it's one of those ones that doesn't get enough light, in my opinion, as far as what's out there and what we're doing with major telco providers across the globe. So I'm looking forward to this episode with Jason and Komal. But before we get to that, sir, my favorite questions to you. How are you? How are things out on the West Coast? And most importantly, what is the color of the Bay today?
Well, hey, before I get to that, I'll just say that it is interesting. 5G's rolling out, and I deal with Comcast a lot. And Comcast, my kids game late into the night, 2:00 last night. They come and wake me up, Dad, the cable's down. And I'm like, don't you guys have a life, right? And they're like, we need to get a different cable service. And I'm like, yeah, they got 5G now. They got hubs for 5G that just give your house, full on 5G capability. And so the telco industry is going to start coming in and taking over, what is traditionally been, our connectivity to our worlds and our homes, as well as obviously services and on the edge services. So it's going to be an interesting thing to watch 5G, because 4G was never fast enough. You had too much lag time to game, where 5G, has really, really good response time, 1 ms, kind of response time on lag. So it's like, it'll be interesting to see how this takes over. Yep.
Fiber and copper and coax, right? We used to be our modals.
Right. Yeah. I want to go
remember where it was a big deal when we had dry copper pairs with ISDN service back in the day, and how big of a deal that was. And I had a crazy business plan to go and buy an alarm company so you could roll out your own ISDN service, because there were so many dry copper pairs that were out there. But that's a different story for a different day, but it is most certainly changing, right? That the physical access and the infrastructure build, and what we talk about last mile services and what that would cost to run for, to make that present point from, your D-slams on out. It's incredible. It's changing, right? And it's going to allow these providers to use, various different edge services, and I think we talk about, and I'm sure we'll get into things like Open RAN and where all that's headed. So I can't wait to continue the conversation today.
And we'll talk about that. The topic today, we have guest Jason James, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Telco, and Komal Khungar. See, I can't do it, Kamal. But we have him. He's Senior Telco Cloud Specialist. So we're going to be talking today about a blog that's out that I think Jason actually authored, called "What the Heck is Bare Metal in Cloud? Why are vendors doing that?" So we've got them on the show. Should be a fun topic today. I'm actually looking forward to it. The weather of the Bay, before we go there, and we'll swing by Corey. My weather is beautiful. There's a high that is stopping the jet stream. Jet stream's pulling cold air from Canada down. So it's been like freezing in the morning. Like we had frost last night, 30 degrees here in California, but crystal clear blue skies, chilly in the mornings for sure. Snow on the grass or frost on the grass. So it's been we get a little bit of winter in California. We haven't had much of that. And Corey Romero, I know you've had winter, and you've been dealing with all the VExpert announcements. How's it going out there?
Going great. Yeah, we've had winter storm roll in since Sunday night. It's been snowing pretty much nonstop, but it's really light, so it's not like a heavy snow. So it's not like we have feet out front. But we're feeling that cold come down as well as the temperatures drop here in Utah. As far as VExpert goes, we talked about last week the announcements. So we did announce the VExpert program. What we're doing this week is we're starting Monday, we're releasing licenses for all of our software for VMware. We are working on a SaaS model. So like as we move into the SaaS services, how do we pass those licenses off to vExperts? So that is something that I'm tackling, something that I'm working on. So stay tuned for that. And again, the vExperts sub programs will open next week. So I will send out email for that. Those are for vExperts only. If you see an announcement on that and you're interested and you're not a vExpert, shoot me an email. C Romero, ROMERO at VMware.com, and we can talk.
All right. Awesome. Somebody in chat asks, when are they going to have call for papers for VMworld? And the answer is, I don't have the exact date, but I think it's in early April is my thought process around that. I know they're making some big announcements in early April, and I think that's all tied together. So stay tuned. Don't have much VMworld announcements yet, because I think they're going to do some big stuff, and everything's going to be rolled together. And my guess is sometime in early April, we'll get all of that spun up, and you'll hear some stuff about what's happening with VMworld this year. So with that, let's get to our guests on the show. Jason James, thanks for coming here. Why don't you introduce yourself? We always do this. We'll go with you, Jason, first before Komal. Jason, why don't you tell us, how did you get here? What's your career arc look like? What do you do? And where do you work today? I don't know if you work at VMware, if you're somewhere else. I don't have that in front of me, but tell us how you got here and what do you do?
Absolutely. Today I work for VMware. I'm a senior product competitive marketing manager in the Cebu business unit. How did I get here? Well, it's kind of a squiggly line, as I think we all have squiggly lines. I started off my career in Chicago at Heller Financial. I was a systems analyst at a financial firm in Chicago. I left there for a year, went to Sun Microsystems, and I was they had a program called the BOB program. And so at the BOB program, you were trained in everything Sun, and then you were sent out to the field to support your customers. And so as a field engineer, support and implementation, I did site visits, install $1 million servers, storage, fiber channel switches, you name it. We were doing it, from Hitachis to Brocade Silkworm 1600s, if you remember that.
Yeah.
And so then from there, I moved to General Dynamics. General Dynamics, I did some DoD work where I did some counter-field intelligence stuff, still operating Solaris boxes, doing actually remote desktops, so we no less, right? Analysts had remote desktops, and we supported that along with Citrix. Went from there to NetApp. I did some NetApp storage. I was a storage engineer for a while. And before I got to NetApp, I did a little consulting where I was integrating Riverbed, VMware, and NetApp. And so from there, I went to NetApp sales. From NetApp sales, I went to VMware sales. I did, I live in the Washington, D.C. area. So I've been in and around federal agencies for probably about 10 years. And I sold to the government, FBI, these places within VMware and in NetApp. And then about 4 years ago, I made the transition to telco. Because, when I was looking around, this 5G field seems to be just getting started. And I thought it would be a good space to take some of those skills over to, and learn telco and also apply what I knew to telco, which brings me here now. How do I get to marketing? Is a bit of a, we'll just say, somebody saw something in me and, and then here I am, to take some of those technical skills and experiences, begin to now be a support the sales, kind of analyzing the market as this thing kind of shifts as it grows, and also help fight some of the battles that we're going to talk about today.
I thought it was that they took into surgery, took half your brain out, and then came out and said, "Okay, now you can go work in surgery. You're all ready for that, right? You don't have to think really hard. You just, you go do marketing."
No, I can just take your knee out at this point, right?
Right. All right. Well, that sounds interesting. I got to say, I was at Sun Microsystems. I did from 91 to 2006 at Sun, and then I came over to VMware, but did work at NetApp and some of the other places too. Like it's a very, very similar career, right? As we all end up here, probably just a little bit ahead of you. So that's cool. Thanks for sharing that. Good to have you on the show. Komal Khungar, or how would you say your last name? And I want to tell us the same thing. How did you get here?
Yeah, Eric, you got it right. Komal Khungar. And my journey started 96 in the professional track. And I did my undergrad in computer science and master's graduate in information system or software systems. So it started in the telco vertical. We discussed a little bit in terms of ISDN switches and transitioning into the signaling as a signaling building foundation of the networks, right? So I worked with companies called Techlec, and that got acquired by Oracle. Oracle had this vision of converging the IT and the network technologies, right? The operations technology, the virtualization technologies, the whole continuum of the computing ecosystem, right? So, yeah, my journey kept up with the virtualization continuum. We built the bare metal in the beginning, ISDN switches, monolithic vertical solutions, and then migrated into the from research engineer role to programming architecture role to product management. And in 2012, when NFV was started to get introduced into the telco networks, that's when I got into the product management and assumed the global pre-sales role, where I got to work with several tier 1 and tier 2 operators across the geographies, right? Understanding the pain points for the networks and how the cloud technologies are used, right, in terms of automation, orchestration, and such. So, yeah, I think as part of that journey, I did joined VMware in early 2021, right, 2021, and supporting the North America region as a telco cloud specialist. And glad to be here. Right?
Yeah, nice to have you here. The telco space, Matt. I know that it's like a black box for me, right? Like I always assume my phone works. I got all these maps delivering to me, but
I was just thinking about that, right? Yeah, exactly. It's its own nomenclature with its own acronyms and whatnot. It's military-esque in some of its definitions. Just Komal had spoke about tier 1 and tier 2 providers, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so how do we define tier 1 and tier 2? I'm thinking CLEX versus, even if CLEX are a thing anymore, I think of my old routing days of what we did with trying to get it past toll bypass and whatnot. So, Komal, how would you define a tier 1 and a tier 2 provider these days? How do we classify that for our audience?
Yeah, so for all practical purposes, right, the tier 1s would be the operators, the service providers, right? Not limited to a specific service that they are delivering. They have portfolio of services and have the spectrum that they bought from the government, right? They have the compliance to adhere to, and they provide the services to other CLEX or other wholesale or MVNO providers, right? So in the wireless network, that's where the mobile, you have the public land mobile network. Those are the tier 1 operators, the global entities. There are like 3 or 4 dominant players in each region. And then there are secondary players who are like, fast adopter or the early followers, right? So that there are technology introducer who are cutting edge of the curve, adopting or introducing new 5G technologies, right? Buying the spectrum first hands, right? Early introduction of services. And then there are interconnects who are interconnecting these tier 1s and tier 2s to make that global network.
So I guess you could think of it like
tier 2, do they normally own spectrum, or are they leasing spectrum off of a tier 1?
So it's a mix of both, right? So they can have some spectrum, not all spectrum for global coverage. They can have the spectrum to operate in a specific region, if you will.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, topic of today caught our attention. Bare metal. We hear about bare metal and bare metal on clouds, and the cloud providers are, trying to push bare metal. And you guys, I think, Jason, you wrote an article on fiercewireless.com, got picked up. What the heck is bare metal cloud, and why are vendors pushing decades old architecture? I thought that captured kind of a good question, like what is bare metal for clouds now, and why are they pushing that? And I kind of thought it was interesting. And then you have a good article out there, and I'll put it in I'll put it in chat on TalkShoe if you happen to be over there. Why are they doing this? And you obviously cover in the article what why not to do this? What features are they missing if you don't actually have the virtualization layer or the hypervisor and everything else that we give you there? So why don't you just take us through kind of like the topic here, to explain how you got into writing a blog article on it.
Well, it's something that we see all the time in terms of, we see the telco market specifically now pushing bare metal. And bare metal, as you can see in the article, it's just another word for physical server. You know, if you take us back 10 years ago, I was having the same conversation with enterprises when virtualization was first becoming enterprise tool. And everybody was like, oh, is it going to perform well? And, you know, will I be able to run my databases, and will Oracle run on it? And you know, will SQL run on it? And we've proven that all those things, the virtualization performs well. And this was 10 years ago. And so to me right now, we have a market opportunity for all our competitors to get some market share. And the best way for them to get some market share is to keep virtualization out. And so now they've created this very creative way to say, hey, no virtualization. And then also they create this other term, we'll say bare metal clouds. And so we poke fun of it, but, you know, we're actually being pretty serious in terms of, you know, one, VMware virtualization, the technology that is virtualization made clouds possible, right? So that we can treat resources, CPU, memory, storage as a resource, and then manage them as such with software, hence the software-defined data center. And so now we have this group of competitors saying, hey, we can do the same thing with bare metal servers, kind of impossible. But they say, then what they're not saying is that, hey, we're going to use Kubernetes as our software layer to allow us to manage these resources, right? And Kubernetes, in my opinion, is a application delivery, software, right? Management, placement. These are things that VMware has been doing for quite some time, over 20 years, right? And so we're very, very good at software placement, resource management, these types of things. And Kubernetes is an application that we do the same thing for, right? And so, you know, there's two things happening here, right? There's a market play from all the other competitors to say, hey, we need to keep VMware out of the space because we know what they can do. And there's two. The second thing is that they're using, say, for instance, allowing to have this conversation that's kind of like has these points, if you will. And they're coming in at this level of the point where I'm talking to you and saying, hey, we can perform just as well. We can do all this automation things with this piece of software, right, while installing on Kubernetes, on bare metal, because it's going to give you better performance. And the piece that they're missing is that this is telco. And so if we were deploying a web scale application, Kubernetes was built for web scale applications. Meaning, if I release a very cool application and it gets super popular, I need more resources, more of my application to handle connections to do whatever I'm doing. And then Kubernetes can say, oh my God, I've got 1 million connections. Give me, 1 million more containers, right? And so this is what Kubernetes was built for and does that very well. When you place Kubernetes into a telco environment, what we're doing is not quite web scale, right? What we're doing is taking advantage of some of the APIs and the way I can program Kubernetes and tell it what to do to then offer me to build some type of connection to the physical world. When I say connection to the physical world, this is where the rubber meets the road, because there's lots of drivers, software, alignment it needs to have happen between virtual and physical that we do from a automation perspective. When I say we, I'm saying VMware, right? That is done upon instantiation. So basically what I'm saying here is that all the complicated stuff is done via automation upon deployment, which means that I can very much so deploy my application and then have all those hard things done for me when that container hits that piece of hardware. Now, conversely, if I had to do this across a RAN deployment, a radio access network, that may be 10,000 times. And so if you've as a system administrator had to do anything against multiple servers, whether it's 10 or 20 or 100, right? It becomes pretty complicated, not only to manage the process of doing one, but the configurations for each box. And so we're solving multiple problems here in terms of how we engage, wash and repeat from an automation perspective. And so what we have here today is this very strong market voice saying that, hey, bare metal is the way to go because we're going to get you more performance and we're going to, be a cheaper experience, or cost you less and be a cheaper, I'll say a less expensive investment. And I think, as we all know, if you built a cloud before, right? Imagine this being, 15 years back before people had built a cloud. There's all sorts of gotchas and ways you need to transition your thinking when you begin to do something at scale and this complicated. And so that's pretty much the problem here. And because we've got every other competitor using Kubernetes as an entryway to grab market share, this is what we're fighting. Hence, this is what the article talks about, while poking some fun at the same time.
Yeah. I think I think you hit on a couple of key points there, and from my experience, it's almost like how Kubernetes originally got into the application space, right? In application delivery, right? Makes sense. Google did it to scale. But and then you saw startups and people adopt this technology and have reasonable success with it. It's a good architecture for deploying apps. But that's because you're a reasonably small company, right? And you're not scaling out infrastructure across multiple data centers, and so it works kind of. It's okay. But then as soon as you become successful at it, and maybe it happened, you ran it in a department, right? As soon as you have to start dealing with the problems as for scale, right? Where, okay, I got to automate a lot of things, right? And I got to build that automation, right? And like, well, who's testing the automation? Who's updating the automation? How am I rolling out new automation for the applications? As soon as you start dealing with those problems, you quickly get into what VMware has already built and built very well at managing that automation for deploying, your infrastructure. And the Kubernetes stuff really started to need the providers of these small instances had to start building those solutions from scratch, right? And as soon as they started building solutions from scratch, they quickly realized, and I know a lot of companies did that have come to Tanzu, as soon as we started to scale this out, we ran into all the problems that VMware had already solved, 5 years ago, and we don't really have to rebuild this again. And some of the providers build, but they build kind of like half-baked stuff, or they're not even near where VMware is, and it'd be like 10 years before they get to where we are today. And so I feel like it's the same kind of model being applied here. Am I correct in kind of assessing that way?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think I would add to that is that, customers, after you try to build a system, right, you spend a lot of time doing that. And I think we've seen that with OpenStack, right, where a lot of telco providers try to wade into OpenStack. We're going to build this thing ourselves, and we're going to not only support the system, but also make it work. And it's almost akin to like, if I want a new car, I want to go buy a kit and buy it and then drive it. And what I really want to do is just drive the car, right? I want to spend less time deploying and more time getting value out of my solution. And so I think because 5G is so new, and it's projected to cost so much, we have competitors and tier one providers looking for shortcuts, and that they think that shortcut is bare metal and Kubernetes put together. And there are plenty of folks that say, for instance, are saying that, hey, Kubernetes on bare metal it works very well, and I don't argue that at all. I think there's the right tool for the job, and what I do think here is that in a 5G IoT, very dynamic type of environment, software environment and hardware environment, right? There's not going to be one tool for the job. It's going to be the integration of multiple types of technologies and protocols. And I think what we're fighting here is a market share battle being posed as a technical battle. I'll say you, for instance, with one example I had when I was working for the Enterprise Satellite Center for NOAA, and I was in front of a set of PhDs, and I was introducing VMware to them, and they said to me, "Hey, Jason, do you think that the overhead for virtualization is going to impact our satellite processing?" And I'm like, well, I don't know. I've never been asked that question. But what I did learn out of going through that exercise is that from an application perspective, if you give applications said resources, right, and it reaches its maximum potential as an application, if I'm able to give it more, it won't matter, right? And so what I then need is multiple sets of these applications running at their maximum potential. And this is what configured properly for performance over and over again. And this is what we, from a VMware perspective, enable. Right. And as opposed to, what the market is saying, it's, if you're a system administration, this rings clear. Like, you have to redo these things. And even if you have, say, Ansible automation, there is a bit of tracking to that from a configuration standpoint, that's going to get complicated over time. Because, of course, if I have 10 sites, I'm going to have maybe 20, 30 different variables in each one of these scripts. And how do we wash and repeat that? It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Jason, how much is this of the carriers trying to create a market, so to say, versus true customer demand? In other words, are they trying to spin what is, obviously a very old provisioning system with some new underlying back end with Kubernetes on it, but buying bare metal with a VAR and having it hosted in a DC is something that we've seen since the late 90s, right?
Yep.
How much of this is them trying to bring about a new revenue source, and how much of this is them actually responding to, I should say, customer demand?
And is this carriers, or is this DC? I think the carriers aren't doing this, right? It's the cloud vendors and others that are
that's
marketing
a
to the carrier.
Question, Eric. Right? Are they pitching this to tier twos, or are they actually pitching this to enterprise and commercial space where they would be selling these services to? I mean, who's the one is how much is the original question of, are they trying to create an artificial market, or is there true demand there? And two, who's the actual customer?
Come on, you can go. I'll follow up.
Yeah. So I think you touched initially, Jason, right? So the communication industry has gone through the disruption. So WhatsApp and other mechanisms of introducing the services, getting faster time to market, right? That acceleration of providing something new, right? Testing something is working, making it at scale. So the traditional service providers, communication service providers, they have this processes, tools, and other things that are already there on the systems, right? They are monolithic. There is a resistance to migrate from there, right? And then there are hyperscaler space that is also going through the disruption, right? So if you have that common hyper-converged ecosystem, something similar to what VMware provides at the infrastructure layer or at the application layer, right? So the discussion is between virtualization and Kubernetes as a mechanism to do the development, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and then integrate with their existing tool chain. So VMware, being a type 1 hypervisor, doesn't get into that discussion. That is required to abstract the hardware, to create that agility, acceleration into getting into the market space. So the new or the disrupted player are coming up with the strategy to say, hey, you need cloud, you don't need virtualization, and you are doing this continuation of virtualization continuum, going from cloud rated to cloud native. And I do not see bare metal as that continuation in that journey, right? You're going to serverless. You're doing the cloud native journey. You had, as Jason rightly pointed out, bare metal ecosystem that was there. That may have been the target state architecture, but that doesn't have a place in a cloud native future state architecture, right? This clouds are getting distributed, more decentralized. Now, a lot of hardware vendors, they are trying to justify their space in this disruption, right? They want to play in the 5G monetization engine. How do you sell new hardware? How do you do life cycle of the hardware that you have already done? So the hardware vendors, the network equipment providers who have the affinity to their hardware are trying to come up with either the messaging or a certain naive use case that you can do with a collection of resources and have a pooled resource and provide that as Kubernetes orchestrated deployment, right? Versus having that abstraction for uh, hardware independency, right? So all the hardware vendors do recognize the need for abstraction, and they have the blueprints for type 1 hypervisor abstraction, right? It's not just about bare metal in the compute. As Jason was saying, it's the SDDC layer, right? You need to scale all of those requirements. Some of the workload is IO intensive, some of that is CPU intensive, some of that is network intensive. So, how do you offload some of those so that you get the accelerated benefit? Now, if you have the bare metal, that is a predefined spec, as Jason puts it in his article. It's you need that late binding where you have the shared COTS hardware, but you adopt it to the type of workload that's going to go sit on that, right? And the telco players, they don't have the skills that's needed to deploy that at hyperscaler space. So there is that multiple actor role responsibility enabling the different verticals, right? With 5G, there are several use cases that are enabled. So that tussle is going on between different stakeholders to justify their space and monetize the transformation.
And I'll add, to go back to the market question, to answer that question, there's a couple things happening from a market perspective. One, the market's new, and the dream is that we get to monetize the bottom of the tower, meaning that there could be other use cases for the tier one provider or the owner of those frequency bands to monetize for different slices or use cases out to the user. That user could be emergency services, it could be gaming, it could be self-driving cars, it could be a stadium that needs some enhanced visual things happening, right? These are the capabilities that 5G and the technology behind that radio is going to bring to the market. Now, that is the vision that's being sold to tier one providers. What we have here today is, how do we get there? Because the infrastructure is not there. There's money on the table today. And then we have our competitors selling solutions for today, meaning that they are selling a RAN solution. And when we sell a RAN solution, to go big technical here, is that we have real-time operating system requirements there at the bottom of the tower to run a DU, which is a distributed unit, which talks to the radio, then talks back to the control center. And so when I have that real-time OS on this piece of hardware, I can't run anything else but other than real-time operating OS applications. So now what's that do for me from a market perspective? Says I can't get gaming system unless it's specifically formatted for that operating system, which may in turn interrupt my radio, right? How do I manage that? And so I need more devices at the bottom of a cell tower, which is already cramped. And so I'm making an investment for RAN to just provide data, high bandwidth, for wherever the case, to run that 5G radio. But I can't monetize that only but one way. And so what we have here is, as a solution for today, and as a tier one provider, I need to decide, am I going to plan for only for today to get me the 5G radio, or am I going to plan for the future, which is unclear where that's going to go? And so we've got this dream that is coming to fruition, but it's not here yet. And everybody's vying for market share in terms of where they're going to make this investment. And so what we have done from a market perspective, there's opportunity there. As you can see, if you look around the radio, right, you see there's electric cars, there's going to be growth there. There's augmented reality. There's healthcare options. There's private 5G. There's all these things that will be coming together, and we don't quite know how yet. And so I think there's a bit of risk in the market in terms of, from a provider, as to how all these things are going to shape up, and then also where the markets are going to be to allow the providers or even enterprises now to play in this 5G game to then, make some money. And so we, from a telco perspective in Cebu, have, adopted that, look, we're going to allow you to make the shift when the shift occurs by having this virtualization layer in your platform, which allows us to, one, shift to real time, to non-real time, to do what the time says we need to do, and do that quickly. And I think, while even from a telco perspective, in their enterprises, VMware is big. We own market share in their enterprises. But you've got to think about the context of radio access networks. It's like coming from physical Windows servers and database and moving those things into a virtual platform, and all the, I wouldn't say the challenges, but the second guessing yourselves of CEOs and enterprises, and making the investment to move their infrastructures into this virtualized environment. It's a little bit of, I'm not sure, right? And we've been through this before. And I think soon as we get into spaces where we show and prove that our technologies can work as well here as it did in high compute, whether it's satellite processing, whatever the case, whatever the use case, it can be used here in the same manner, adding some automation to it, it'll do fine. So I think these are the challenges, and I think what we see here heavily. And if you can look at Light Reading and Red Hat and all these other places, they are really they know this, right? We have to get this market share and get in place before VMware, for people become aware of VMware and what they can do, or we're going to lose here too.
Yeah, I was going to say Red Hat. It reminds me of the open source stuff, that everybody discovered, and I just thought we won all the telcos already, right? I thought we had this locked up. I didn't think there was any kind of competition left. I look at the WinWire and we're like, this telco, that telco, this telco. I thought it was all done. So it's interesting to see that the architecture is still solidifying, and I suppose there's always competition, right? But to some degree, this is a little bit of a greenfield, because, as you say, Jason, it's going to get built out, for the edge cloud, the next generation cloud. I think we had somebody on our podcast, Matt, about a year ago. I forget the guy's name, who is responsible for the telco marketing group, and he's like, yeah, that's going to be the next generation cloud completely. Like, we've had cloud inside your data center, then we had cloud at Amazon, Azure, but then the telco cloud is going to be that next cloud that everybody's going to move to. So the architectural battle is what you're talking about, Jason. And I know we're doing okay at it, because I watched the WinWire, and I do see that we are winning, telco business, right? But I think, everybody's opportunistic, right? Especially if you don't have the premier virtualization platform. Like I always joke, like, if you've got a hammer, everything's a nail, right? Like, so if you don't have a hammer, nothing is a nail. We're not going to define anything as a nail. And our competitors can come in and say, no, you don't need a nail. You don't need a hammer, because we don't have a good hammer. So nothing is a nail.
Yeah. I think, it's hard to give customers perspective, right? If you remember some microsystems, it used to take me a week to deploy a Sun cluster. And when I was introduced to VMware, and I deployed a cluster and I moved the application, it took me 15 minutes. I was like, boom, I was blown away, right? And been a fan ever since. And so, I've come to, like, I think we get into an argument where, it might be a conversation where they say, Matt, can you do that? Right? Yeah, of course I can do it on Linux. Linux can do lots of things, right? It's going to take me a long time, and it's going to be hard to support, but yes, I can do it. And so I think, when we go to market and we talk about, is Kubernetes and bare metal a solution that could do this job? The answer is yes. Now, I think we're back to the conversation is, do I want to, build my car, or I want to drive it? And I think the answer for telcos, if you take a look at what they've been through in terms of, from the Kias and Ericssons and these platforms where they're kind of guaranteed success. And you get the feeling like, if I'm a telco CIO, I want to do this new thing, but I also want guaranteed success. So, right. Because my career is on the line, if I make this decision, I invest in VMware, but the market says, and I can't believe it, when people, we get the feedback, from our sales team, it's like, hey, the CEOs and the people responsible are saying the market says we should do this. Why should I go with VMware? Right? Come on. And I just can't believe it. That this is, that the market voice is so strong when you actually look at what we're doing. Really makes deployment of your infrastructure, just push button easy. Now, of course, we'll say with anything, we're growing with the market as well. We still got, still some bugs to be worked out, but I think we're way ahead of complete solution, right? Because if you look at, our competitors, they have to integrate to get top level orchestration. What I mean by, if you take 3GPP as the standard that says, hey, telcos should be able to do these things, and we should also be able to use these protocols and adjust these softwares in this way. And we've taken that 3GPP standard and put it into our software stack, where in our competitors, they only have the Kubernetes portion, but there's an entire another orchestration layer that needs to happen, right? That they rely on third party softwares to make that happen. And so I think when you look at, what we bring to bear, it really hits all the buttons with, of course, runway to grow.
Jason, but we talk about OS selection, right? And the overall carrier quals. As far as, and I think this is a multi-part question and an opportunity to educate our audience. So within the telco BU, and maybe I'm wrong here, this is why I'm throwing a question out there. This is a separate, but separate build from ESX and vCenter and the vSphere stack and the SDDC stack up, correct, for carrier qualifications. So for our carrier grade releases, this is a separate development product, right? Yes, no, maybe I'm wrong there.
No.
Or is it's still within, or is it just a different release cadence? And then how do we go about qualifying those releases to meet the carrier's expectations? I mean, is this something that there is a carrier, an industry certification for the carrier grades, what we would need for this real-time processing? Or is it set up where you're responding to individual tier 1 RFQs where each tier provider would have its own quals? So one, what's a little bit of the build process that we have internally? Is it like for what you would see out in enterprise and commercial, or is it a different thing? And then two, how do we qualify that against an industry or a tier 1 provider standard?
So we'll just start from ESX, and ESX with the release of U3 update, I think it's B or so. This is where the ESX platform team put in high performance, low latency, we'll say adjustments to ESX, right? And so now that they have those in place to support real-time OS, right? So there's some settings within ESX that allows the support for real-time OS, which means real-time virtual machine. We take that, we move that over into telco, and now we add the telco stack, which then uses those components to address the performance configurations from ESX to Photon OS and now into container, right? And so how we meet the low latency performance, now we have PDFs or reports that talk about OSLOT tests, that's OS latency test, OSLOT, and then cyclic. Kamal, I'm gonna have to rely on you to explain cyclic. But these are performance tests that really test latency, right? And so from a say a radio performance perspective, one, we need high bandwidth throughput. We need things to be on time, so low latency, because if you don't have low latency and high throughput all at the same time, then we couldn't do this that we're doing over the internet, right? And have an actual conversation because we're not time synced. And then so things will be weird behavior from a gaming perspective and so on and so forth. And so, and also radio signals are time synced as well. So all of that high capacity accuracy needs to flow from the radio into the DU application, which that server needs to support. And so if you remember, I said, in the beginning here, the configuration from ESX to Photon real-time OS to container and SRLV DPDK. These are technologies that punch the container through the container into the Photon OS down to the physical ESXi host, right? So now I have a physical virtual function, we call them, from the card being binded to the container. And to get all of that to happen, right, I need the right drivers and software and kernel options in the container, as well as the VM, as well as the ESXi host. And this is what I will say, just call it the secret sauce that the telco, CBOO, right? CBOO, that's Secure Access, Secure Edge, are in the TCA telco cloud automation. This is the integration we do with that appliance into ESX. Now, you may have heard, say for instance, well, how come this can't run on VMware, Cloud Foundations software, where things are automatically deployed? We have these pods, we have these racks, and we don't use that platform in the way that it's automated because it's very prescriptive, meaning that things have to be in the right place for the automation to work. And we need to align from the hardware up. Say, for instance, slot 2, the CPU core or NUMA 0, right? All these things need to be lined up in every card that we have in the box. This is so that we reduce the latency when that CPU accesses the memory from that card. We need to be on the same bus. And so once we have the hardware set up properly in proper NUMA alignment, now we take advantage of that. The software, ESX is aware of that, and now we place these high performance, what we call them containers, right, in the right place at the right time, all in an automated fashion. And this is the complicated rubber meets the road component that is very important. And so while ESX, vSAN, NSX, all those things are constant technologies across the board in terms of how would we deploy and engage them. But then we add on top of that, this integration between container, Photon OS, and ESX to bring it all together to produce.
This is a whole other different level of consumption of those services, right? I mean, we're down to NUMA allocation and what bus that something needs to be on. And I joke at this, I kid, but I'm sure it's incredibly relevant and very necessary to achieve these levels of absolute ultra low latency for the workloads that you're seeing coming out of these towers. And to build that out and to go through that validation process and to do that at scale and the automation behind it, and then the life cycling with all of those steps behind that for maintenance operations and patching is, I'm sure, where the secret sauce all comes together.
Yeah, I think, Matt, you're right? So, Jason, you also mentioned that, right? So you have enabling components or technology from broader VMware ecosystem. And then there are reference architecture and blueprints from the telco BU. You have the virtual infrastructure. You have the virtual infrastructure manager. You have the container or the CAS layer. You have the CAS infrastructure manager. Then you have the network functions or the workloads that are from the network that are going to get deployed, co-located with any vertical applications that are going to be sitting. Now, they all are sharing the same infrastructure. The VMware technology is enabling all of those top-down driven alignment of resources from a wider resource pool, creating dedicated instantiation where it is required, when it is required, and it is backed by blueprints and, as you mentioned or asked earlier, the telco certification, that this has been certified with this constituent components and it works with this scale, right? There's capacity for that RAN requirement type of thing, right? So yeah, it's a separate product built using the VMware technology underlying, supporting it or enabling it.
Yeah. All right. What I would say, I got a couple comments here. We got to up level because we're running out of time here. But I would say, Jason, first, I want your marketing card back because the surgery obviously failed. Right? Like you're looking too smart for this podcast. Like you can't have the marketing title anymore because you guys are down in the weeds, right? Like I get it because it's building telco towers and real time OSs and response times. That's pretty cool. I appreciate you guys coming on the podcast. Couple of questions. You have the blog, right, which we published out there, and it's not your blog. It was fiercewireless.com. You just have an article there. I noticed that there is a telco blog out. So if people want to learn more information about this, there is a blogs.vmware.com/telco. I don't know if you guys ever get around to blogging on that too, but it looks like there's quite a bit of content out there as well. Are there other places that, if you're an IT, because we get a lot of IT practitioners, they're running workloads, their traditional data center. If they want to learn about this and come up to speed with some of these architectures, where should they go?
Well, I think first you can definitely go to the telco blog, and there's an additional blog that I wrote there that'll point you to the Fierce Wireless blog that kind of talks about bare metal and the different aspects of that and why you may want to look a little bit more deeper into that. Also, from a telco perspective, there is tons of information regarding which aspect of telco you want to dig into. And there's two main topics there. It could be core, 5G core, and then also the RAN aspects. And both of them have different deployment models. One is more centralized. This is the core, how we say, for instance, you get authenticated to the network. We know who you are from your phone to your SIM. All these things are your service is the part of the 5G core. And that has been containerized. And that's why they call it, the 5G core, because all of the components that make that possible are containerized. And then there's the RAN component, where we've been talking about the complexities of one deploying the software to control the radio. And then, so you could, live on that VMware blog and just do simple, Google searches for RAN architectures. 3GPP is the standards body that really controls how everybody really should be deploying the softwares and the interfaces between those softwares, and that gets us to Open RAN. And so the Open RAN organization as well is a good place to start. Kamal, you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it. I was just adding it. We have a VMware Telco Cloud YouTube channel, and we have the LinkedIn VMware Telco channel as well. And a lot of the information gets available there as well in terms of telco architecture and a lot of what we are doing as a BU and as a company.
Great point, Kamal. I forgot all about the LinkedIn portal and also the YouTube channel. So great resources as well.
All right, great. And I noticed that on the telco blog, you also have a Twitter channel. Looks like it's VMware TELCO. So VMware Telco. If you want to give that a follow, I'm sure you guys are monitoring that too. If people can tweet back and forth on that. Matt, any last words that you want to hit with our guests here?
This could go down a deep dark rabbit hole, but I'll preface this as of the most interesting use case. So, Jason, and I'll let both of you answer this. You're in a unique position to see what carriers are coming up with as far as 5G use cases, right? We talk about what these next gen networks are going to look like, and you've probably got exposed to it. So for the ones that you can talk about, what is the most interesting use case that you've seen thus far coming out of a carrier? Jason, I'll start with you, and then Kamal, I'll ask you the same question, sir.
The ones that I'm excited about is really the augmented reality. This space is really wide open and has so many use cases that it's going to create a whole new industry. And the connectivity that the tier one providers are going to provide to these guys are what's going to drive that. And I say the most interesting is, there's this glasses. I think as soon as augmented reality glasses look better, then that's when it's going to explode. But they have this thing where you can measure signal strength, and you can see the signals in the air and grab it and interact with the signals through the augmented reality. And I think the second piece would be the healthcare use cases. I think there's a lot of opportunity there where you see students collaboratively looking through augmented reality glasses, say for instance, holding your heart. And that is very cool and interesting to me.
Kamal, over to you.
Yeah, I agree on the healthcare side. Verizon is partnering with a lot of verticals in the pharmaceutical, medical, for private network, for facilitating what is required, what is specifically required for healthcare vertical, and providing them the connectivity as the last mile, right? So that connectivity as the enabler, and then going into the vertical integration. I also see shipping, a lot of supply chain, logistics related use case as being introduced and being adopted. What like the whole ecosystem was at a standstill when we had a evergreen got stuck into the chain there, right? What if
Right.
we had a 5G private network that was connected there, could sense that it's going to go a little bit, right? Could have given that early sensor, you could have avoided all of that damage. So it's coming. I see that in the Canada. Well, Canada is working with Halifax Port Authority there, and they are working on that as the use case. Anything that we can do with this technology to save life. There are a lot of use cases that are going on around that ecosystem. I would put my bet on healthcare, and yeah, that would be the
All right.
key
Very nice. Very
use
nice.
case.
Yeah, I'm excited about augmented reality, and I love the idea of unblocking shipping across the world, right? And getting supply chains running again. Also excited. Wouldn't mind that. All right, guys, thank you very much for coming on the show. Jason and Kamal, are you on Twitter? We can always do a shout out on a Twitter handle if you're on Twitter, and if you're not, no worries. They can go just follow the VMware Telco Twitter.
Yep, I'm at Twitter at Virtually Design.
Virtually Design.
Yep.
All right, at Virtually Design. And Kamal, you on Twitter?
I am, but I'm not an active participant there. I just do it on LinkedIn. So yeah.
LinkedIn is becoming the place to be if you're looking for a job doing that kind of stuff. There's a lot of activity on LinkedIn. I give you a shout out for LinkedIn people, because let me tell you, it is also a beast. So go there. All right, guys. The last minute of the show, we're actually 2 minutes over. Sorry about that, but we'll do it anyway. We live stream on VBarbecue. So if you go to youtube.com/VBarbecue, BARBECUE, you can go look at us. You can see what they look like in case you run into them at VMworld next time. And for VBarbecue, because it is lunchtime, Jason, I'll ask you first, what is your favorite barbecue to make, or do you go get barbecue, or do you not eat any barbecue?
No, I definitely eat barbecue, and I don't know, I'm a brisket type of guy.
You're a brisket type of guy. Do you ever make any brisket, or you just consume it?
Just consumer at the moment.
That's just a consumer.
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
There you go. Perfect. Kamal, do you do any Indian barbecue or any kind of barbecue at all? What's your story?
Yeah, I do Indian barbecue, basically vegetarian, paneer tikka. That's my barbecue, chili paneer. Yeah.
Very, very good. Tony Foster, I don't know if you're still around, but I'll do a shout out to you. I know you've been on the chat the whole time. Anything interesting in barbecue?
Yep. Yeah, so we didn't talk about it last week because we ran long on time and stuff. But for the Super Bowl, I did jalapeno popper mushrooms.
Oh boy.
And they're absolutely phenomenal, grilled on the barbecue.
How do you
Basically,
make
they're
a
stuffed mushroom
jalapeno?
cap?
Yeah. You grind up the pepper and then put it in the mushroom and barbecue it?
Yeah, you grind up the jalapeno and you mix it with cream cheese and sharp cheddar cheese and a bunch of other ingredients. and throw it on the grill. It takes about 5 minutes for them to get nice and golden brown, and they just come out absolutely awesome. My wife and I absolutely loved these for the Super Bowl.
That sounds awesome. I love a good barbecued mushroom for sure. All right, with that, we're at the top of the hour. Jason, Komal, thank you a lot for being here. We'll be back again next week. Until then, everybody go get some barbecue and enjoy yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Thank you.